quite. Okay, let's go ahead and continue then. All right. Yeah, so staying kind of on the theme of HR work and evaluation, development, etc., we've laid the foundation for selection. Okay? Now, in some respects, I probably should have talked about evaluation secondly and career development third. That's a natural kind of progression there. But again, the skills, knowledge, abilities, the job analysis really provides the context kind of against which we're going to assess the need for individuals to continue to develop particular skills or knowledges or ability. Now, your authors does a very, very nice job of differentiating between training and education. And I think it's even pertinent here in a university setting. And there are times when I'll be talking about training of social workers, and I call myself short on that, and I'll say, hey, wait a minute, this is a master's degree program. This is a postgraduate program at a major regional university. But the fact is that social work education involves lots of training in addition to lots of higher education. So that when you're in your practice classes, for example, and this being one of those practice classes in the concentration, we're very concerned with helping you understand best practices so that you can begin to kind of regulate your behavior in those particular kind of roles to what we know to be, know in quotation marks, the preferred ways of conducting oneself in certain kind of technologies. So if you're learning about motivational interviewing, for example, or you're learning about rational emotive therapy, or for crying out loud, if you were learning about psychoanalysis, there would be best practices involved in each of those technologies. And while some are much more arcane, much more esoteric, well, that's really the word, much more esoteric, I think in terms of psychoanalysis, they still involve an effort to help you move toward a kind of modal or exemplar practice training. Education really designed to help you think your way through one-of-the-kind complex situations, particularly those that don't involve a patterned response. They don't yet involve enough knowledge, enough experience with these kind of things so that we have a particular preferred response for which you can be trained. Okay. Training can be formal and informal. It can involve on-the-job as well as off-the-job kind of experiences. There's a fellow by the name of Robbins who I really like. I think he's a terrific author with regard to organizations and administration. He writes in the business, for the business community. And one of his points is that most informal training is nothing other than employees helping each other out. We have in the profession a term that's similar to this. You were actually exposed to it last week in your readings. Remember peer supervision? Peer supervision? Right? All peer supervision is a more formalized effort at accomplishing the same thing. Peers, colleagues, helping to inform you as to best practices, giving you feedback, etc. Right. Now notice again in your text, staff development, a hybrid kind of activity, generally focusing on a particular problem. And one thinks that a very focused effort, generally many times a one-time only kind of experience of addressing a particular issue, prescribing a set of policies or practices in response to it, would be typical of staff development. I also want to point to mentoring here. Mentoring is, I think, a particularly important and many times neglected or absent area when we're talking about professional development. Now, mentoring involves a senior individual, and that can be by virtue of position, although it doesn't have to be, it could be a peer, many times by age, but most of the time by experience. A senior by experience, establishing a relationship with a junior member of the organization, junior member of that kind of position, and being a coach, being a sounding board, and being an advocate for that individual. There are a number of people who would suggest, and I'm one of these, that if you can do it in such a way that an individual supervisor is not the mentor, that's probably the better way to go. Because a supervisor has a responsibility for fairness, for transparency. It's important for a supervisor to be able to demonstrate a lack of favoritism on the part of the people he or she supervises. It's awfully difficult to be a sounding board, a confidant, an advocate of a junior individual, and at the same time demonstrate that you're fair, that you're equitable, and that you're objective with regard to the formal evaluations of performance that one makes. Mentoring is especially important for upwardly ambitious individuals, and there's nothing wrong with ambition at all. Matter of fact, if we weren't ambitious, we wouldn't be here in graduate school, first of all. Probably wouldn't be in higher education at all. It's also particularly important for minorities. That glass ceiling, and I've spoken several times in the class so far about Rosebeth Moss Cantor's wonderful work, Men and Women of the Corporation, where she argues that it's not men against women, it's not women against men, it's anybody that constitutes in the power levels of an organization some collection of sameness. And it could simply be that you're all from an Ivy League college, or it might be that you're all from a certain particular socioeconomic class, or it could be that you're all practicing a certain particular faith, etc. But if you have the power and you see one another as similar, as sharing that one or a few sets of characteristics, there's a tendency to provide a kind of a groupthink with regard to the importance of that, and there's a tendency then to deny people who are different from you on those characteristics from equal access to positions, to rewards, and the exercise of fairness. A mentor helps to negotiate. A mentor helps to warn. A mentor helps to identify those kind of things so that you're better prepared to deal with them. And a mentor as advocate then may many times be in a position to remind those people who would otherwise be prejudiced in their actions that there's a danger of that there's a need to recognize that people come in different packages and that skills can be embedded, potential embedded in different packages. Mentoring is particularly important for folks. Relatively few organizations actually have formal mentoring programs. Now, Fortune 500 companies typically do. Very interesting, isn't it? The companies that are the biggest, wealthiest organizations tend to recognize the importance of mentoring, especially for their executives, mid-manager people, mid-managers especially. Even if an organization doesn't have a formal mentoring program, chances are that there'll be nothing that would prevent you from informally negotiating a mentoring relationship with somebody. And trust is very important in that, as is competency on the part of the person that you're seeking that kind of help from. Now, by the way, even as I mention this, let me also mention a warning. It's very, very common in the American world of work to be accused of sexual hanky-panky with people with whom you have a particularly cordial relationship. And it used to be male-female was the pattern that you saw again and again and again, right? And now, as we become a bit more aware and in many circles a bit more understanding and accepting of a variety of practices, male-male and female-female relationships can also be subject to these kind of accusations. As a matter of fact, it's almost the case where you can count on it. You can count on it sometime along in your career. You're going to hear accusations of various people within your organization having engaged in sexual improprieties with one another. And by sexual improprieties, I really am not making a value judgment there. I'm really talking simply about the way that people within the subgroup which you're a part, or the way the formal policies of an organization might read, would view such behavior. Right? It's not a moral issue as far as I'm concerned. And I'm certainly not referring to it in that way here. I'm just referring to it in terms of the rumor mongering that's likely to occur and the potential significance of what that means in terms of how you're viewed or how the individual is viewed in the world of work. I mention that in this context because mentoring does involve a different relationship, a different level of intimacy that can be entirely appropriate, entirely innocent, be very, very well spelled out, but it still doesn't protect you or anybody else from these kind of accusations. I'd like to say, kind of explain it away as human nature, and I guess part of it is human nature because we see it so much, but that really shouldn't excuse unfounded accusations and rumor mongering. Just be aware of that, that's all I'm saying here. Some things to remember. When we're talking about career development, remember that career and job are not synonymous. They really relate to or refer to related but different kind of things. The job is a very specific status within a very specific organization. Time limited, governed by all kind of policies and procedures that others set, and measured by expectations that many times others have. Career is something that you orchestrate. You don't do it willy-nilly. You're not the Wizard of Oz where you can just kind of create things out of the vacuum, but then neither could the Wizard of Oz. But a career is something that many times will span, usually will, multiple jobs within the same or multiple organizations. Career involves much more opportunity for choice on your part. And you will have a number of career choices that will confront you or make themselves available to you as you continue to mature in social work over the years. One of the reasons I think that it's important to remember that career and job are not synonymous is that you can lose a job without losing your career. That you might be dissatisfied with the job, and in fact, that dissatisfaction might in fact be a reflection of your commitment to your career. There are all kinds of possibilities here. I would suggest to you that it's much more important for you to be career-oriented and use that as part of the spectrum of criteria that you use whenever you assess your job, your satisfaction with your job. Career is much more likely to be influenced by the kind of things we talk about right here and the kind of things that are important to the profession of social work, because these things kind of stand above particular jobs. Jobs tend to be anchored more in organizational realities, organizational culture, organizational history, particular supervisor and peer expectations. But of course, it's at the job level that you're interacting with clients. It's at the job level that you're interacting with people in need or people who have the potential to benefit from the help that you can give them. So I don't mean to diminish job. If you're too focused on job, you might lose sight of opportunities that exist for you, or you might begin to view your career in ways that are not particularly healthy or healthful for you, particularly if you're experiencing frustrations or challenges on the job that are difficult to meet. Robbins, again, thinking in terms of Robbins here, argues that you should think of yourself as self-employed, even if you're employed in a major organization. So you're employed in DCS, for example. You're employed at ETSU. You're employed in an organization that has 10,000 employees, and you're one of them. But if you're career-minded, and you also realize that there are no guarantees with a career or no guarantees with a job, if you're thinking about yourself as a self-employed agent, then you may also be a bit more flexible, a bit more open-minded, a bit more ambitious. You might be better able to accept the responsibilities and to be able to successfully negotiate the different kind of situations that you face as you pursue your career. So, if you're going to think of yourself as an employee, a self-employed individual, even if you're working in such an organization, what are some of the prescriptions here? What are some of the things that are important for you to do in order to be successful in directing your own career? Well, you start with knowing yourself. If you don't know yourself, if you don't have a realistic understanding of who you are, then it's going to be very, very difficult for you to understand the impact that you have on others, what your skill sets are, where your particular deficits are, and we all have deficits. It's how we respond to those and what we respond to that's the key here. That's absolutely essential to all this. Manage your reputation. Becomes very, very important. And how do you deal with other people? How do you treat other people? How do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with stress? How are you known to others? We've talked about the looking glass self here. We've talked about Johari's window in class earlier in the semester. Right? So part of knowing yourself relates to the looking glass self and one of those cells in Johari window. Managing your reputation really relates to an intentional effort to influence the ways others perceive you and how they think about you, how they value you in terms of their perspectives. Build and maintain network contacts. It's going to help you identify opportunities that exist for you. It's going to help you leverage your way into possibilities that exist for you. You know, knowing that something is one thing, getting your foot in the door is the other. The nice thing here is, particularly in social work, is that managing your reputation, well, first I'll go back here. Knowing yourself means the ability to know where your strengths are in terms of your practice repertoire. So that as you're helping individuals, as you're engaged in practice, at whatever kind of practice that is, then you can pitch with your strength, pitch with your strong pitches, if you will. By managing your reputation, you make it easier for people to work with you and make it probably more likely that people invite or look forward to the opportunity to work with you, as opposed to resisting such kind of interaction. Building and maintaining network contacts, how important is that as we seek the kind of resources that we need for our clients? Very, very few organizations that we've talked about before have everything that it takes in order to meet in a comprehensive way the multiple and complex needs that our clients experience. So to be able to build and maintain those network contacts facilitates the work that you do with clients, not only with your ability to take advantage of opportunities that exist for yourself. Keep current in your own profession. Keep current in the knowledge base and in the skill base that's required of practice. In contemporary times in social work, evidence-based practice, clearly important. Clearly certain technologies that arise that become known as best practices with regard to particular clientele or particular kind of problems. If those clientele, if those kind of problems lie within the domain of your organization, it's incumbent upon you to develop some level of sophistication, some level of competency with regard to those particular kind of things. Balance specialist and generalist competencies. We talked last week about the importance of your demonstrating competence in your work. Here, that competence relates not only to the specialized skills that you have for a particular job that you occupy at this point in time, that position, but the generalist competencies are important because a variety of opportunities are likely to arise for you. You can't predict what those things are going to be. And so your versatility, your flexibility rests to a considerable extent on your ability to translate skills into new organizational context, into new role context, into new client context, etc. Those speak to those generalist competencies. One of the neat things about MSW social work education is that it's built upon the foundation, professional foundation, of generalist competencies, which you can also be found in the BSW programs, and then in the concentration very much on specialized kind of things. So the concentration provides for you that more specialized, more ambitious subset of skills, knowledge, and abilities that provide real entry into a particular arena of social work practice, but the generalist competencies remain extremely important because they always provide the foundation with more specialized skills, and they also provide us with that skeleton key in the human services, where we can go in so many different directions depending upon personal preferences, contingencies, and opportunities. It's important to document your achievements. At some point in time, chances are you're going to have to sell yourself to employers. You're going to be able to sell yourself to some extent with the interview, with the person that you are. That's so very, very important. But employers typically are also going to want to see, particularly for people who are at the midpoint or above in their career, the particular evidence of successes that you've achieved. The more ambitious, the more profound, typically the better. To the extent that you can provide documentation of that, in terms of specific achievements and your specific contributions to those achievements, it becomes even more important. And keep your options open. That flexibility is so important, so important. As you begin your career, some of you will be beginning your career in social work as you graduate. One of the bits of advice that I offer people, take it for what it's worth, this is free. Don't be too picky for the first job. Don't be too particular for the first job out of grad school. Because you've got a lot of things that you get and need to do yet, starting with knowing yourself. There's so much learning that you can do about yourself, about your identity and skill set as a social worker on that first year out of school, when every day is not an internship, it's a day where you're held accountable in a very, very different way as a human service employee, as a master level social worker, let's say out in an agency, right? Chances are you will learn so much about the knowledge and skills that are very much a part and a focus of this curriculum. Oh, guess when you're going to learn it? You're going to learn it next year. You're going to learn it that first year out. Partly it's when you have time to kind of reflect on it. Partly when you don't have to, you're not having to chase the readings and the homework, but you're being confronted every day with clients who call for you to demonstrate competency with regard to this knowledge and skills. That's when you're really going to start to put some stuff together. And so one of the things that you're going to find yourself doing is knowing yourself better in terms of what it means to be a social worker, what it means to have that kind of responsibility day in and day out, what it means to be thought of as having command of your profession, even if you're only one day out of grad school. That's an interesting kind of thing, right? You're going to find yourself managing your reputation because you will be having a new social identity with that degree in your pocket. Yeah. After you've been in that position for a while, right? Developing contacts, letting the world do its kind of thing, new job opportunities arising, etc. Then you have the opportunity to pursue, in your second job perhaps, something closer to what you really want to do, where you really want to commit yourself for years and years to come. But I wouldn't suggest that you start out that way. Because if you're too particular, you're going to wind up being too particular, looking at the wanted ads for too long a period of time. Right? And it's still a competitive world out there. I would rather be practicing, building my reputation, establishing contacts, oh yeah, and being paid money, right? While I am also looking for the next job, but not having to be in an absolute hurry about that next job, because I already have one that's satisfactory to me, at least for a period of time, and I'm doing the kind of things I need to do. I would also suggest that you do something, and somebody, and I don't remember who, I really, really wish I could remember who suggested I did do this, because I would then credit him or her. But somebody once when I was in grad school said, it might have been Bill Vanderdoes. I'll give Bill Vanderdoes the credit for this. He was my advisor at Ohio State when I was working on my MSW degree. He said, every year, just take a time out and think, reflect on you in the profession and where you are in your career. And I can remember doing that on the anniversary of my first year as an Air Force social worker, which is my first position out of the MSW program. And I just blocked off an hour and sat in my office and thought, wow, the life changes that I had experienced in that year, the growth that I had experienced in that year, the command I had then that I didn't have a year earlier over content that I was being quizzed on, etc. It was like, wow. Now I did it again the second year. That was really interesting, because as dramatic the changes for me the first year were, the absence of the same was what was dramatic the second year. And that's what the year I realized, you know something? I didn't get much out of this year. I don't know about my clients, but I didn't get much out of this year. And I'm reminded of a saying that goes something like this. There's a difference between 10 years of experience and 1 year of experience that's then repeated 9 times, right? Who wants to simply repeat a year of experience, right? We're not on this planet that long. So when I had the opportunity to sit down that third year and block out an hour, hey, third year was a celebration. That was really different. I encourage you to do the same kind of thing. It's all part of that being responsible for your own career, but it's also very much a part of that critical responsibility of being a self-disciplined, self-critical professional. And your clients deserve nothing less. Now let's talk about performance evaluation. Given the time, you'll be surprised at how quickly we're able to achieve this. All right. First of all, why conduct performance evaluation? Well, first of all, let's remember this. Remember POSDECORB? Remember POSDECORB from early in the semester, right? POSDCORB, evaluation, right? Evaluation, we've talked about it a bit in terms of program evaluation, but there's also personnel evaluation that's a part of evaluation in POSDECORB, all right? And the timing for this, in a sense, couldn't be better for us as a class, right? What did you do the first 10 minutes or so for class tonight? Studied? Well, I hope that you conducted or you filled out the SAI, which was an academic approximation of a performance evaluation. So you were evaluating me as an instructor, and you were evaluating the class as an academic vehicle as well. Consumer-derived evaluation of performance. I'm right now involved in finishing up, I hope it's getting finished up, the very last of the staff evaluations that I'm required to do every year as a supervisor here at the university. Right? So both of us, all of us, we're all involved in one type or format or another of performance evaluation even right today. Okay? Well, there are a variety of reasons to do it. Right? In the end, we're going to emphasize these two down here at the bottom, and that is providing feedback to employees in terms of how the organization, especially through the eyes of the supervisor, values the employee's contribution to the organization, and also to provide a basis for award allocations, merit pay, raises, eventual promotions, or whatever. There are a variety of other reasons that one might conduct performance evaluations, and you can read them right there. They tend not to be as pertinent to us at this point in time, probably not as pertinent to you where you are in your careers at this point in time. What do performance evaluations measure? Well, the answer here is that they can measure a variety of things. They can measure individual task outcomes. All right? And the important thing to remember here is that this is an evaluation then, or a choice of measure that emphasizes ends over means. Now, one of the problems that can arise here is when the organization does not provide the means or the context that's necessary for an adequate outcome achievement on the part of an employee. So we've talked about, for example, job descriptions. But there's also a way of writing a job description where you embed within the description detailed narrative of the context of the job, what resources the organization should be expected to provide to the employee by virtue of providing for adequate task performance. So for example, if you were a typist, for example, you might be expected to type, and I don't know how fast these kind of things are, let's say 300 words a minute with no more than 2 typographical errors, right? But the organization might also be interested in very clearly identifying that this would be under conditions where the typist is not interrupted, that this is under a condition where there are no noxious elements of the environment, loud noises, vibrations, equipment malfunctions, etc. Once you start to factor those things in and begin to realize that a variety of those hygiene factors can be ever present within an organization or within a person's work environment, then you can begin to measure the adequacy of output of a particular individual as compared to the conditions under which the individual was forced to work to begin with. Notice that when you're measuring task outcomes exclusively, you're pretty much ignoring the context and the resources that are provided to the individual in order to do those kind of things. Well, what else can you measure? Well, you can measure behaviors particularly. And that might be somewhat divorced from the actual outputs or the actual level of goal achievement. This happens particularly when you're talking about people who are part of work groups, where you can't identify and isolate the particular achievement of any one individual in the work group, but somehow you still want to hold people accountable and still reward people differentially for the contributions that they've made here. Okay. Sometimes what you'll see happen here will be identifying particular group roles or identify particular contributions that individuals make within a group context which are logically connected to goal attainment. So if you measure those particular behaviors or you measure the satisfaction with which an individual meets expectations of a role within a group, you have a way of tracing a contribution back to what the group has achieved. Now, the farthest removed from actual performance, but it may be something that you have to settle in on, would be the measure of traits. In the academic community, that's frequently expressed as collegiality. Collegiality. And many folks who are faculty members will argue that collegiality is a very, very important criterion to use when you're assessing performance in any given year. But by the same token, you're then challenged with the question, well, what do you mean by collegiality? And how do the different dimensions of collegiality translate into the kind of work performance and kind of attainment and achievement that a person can be held accountable for? And the answer that we have here, for example, at ETSU is we'll break it down. Break down collegiality in terms of what you actually mean by way of specific kinds of behavior. So it may be treating students and colleagues with respect, right? Contraindication of that would be calling somebody a very provocative and profane name in a public setting. You might say, well, gee, that's a pretty obvious kind of thing, and you're just making it up. I've got news for you. At one of the universities where I worked, one of the things I had to deal with was a faculty member coming to me and saying that another faculty member in a public setting had been very, very insulting, using a variety of profane words. So it happens. See, that would be an example of, at the broader level, the absence of collegiality or a failing of collegiality, but it would be measured in a much more specific way, behaviorally anchored, a little bit safer than that. Who conducts performance evaluations? Well, quite a few people can conduct them. So for example, we can have peers conducting performance evaluations. After all, who probably better knows your competency than people who work with you and who do the same kind of job that you do? Right. Of course, the problem with peer evaluation could be that a variety of biases come into play. It could be jealousy. If it were a situation where all the people within a particular work group who were peers were evaluating one another, some unscrupulous individual might intentionally, negatively or bias the evaluations that he or she provides to all others, hoping that the others would not do the same to him or her, and therefore the norm would suggest that one's own evaluation, that particular person's evaluation, would be higher. I worked at a university where each of the faculty members did a colleague evaluation for each of the other faculty members in the department. One particular faculty member was notorious for rating every other faculty member in the department as unacceptable with regard to collegiality. Every other member of the department. The employee can provide a self-evaluation. Okay. Now, this is the thing I really want you to call to your attention. The studies on this thing show that the average employee will rate his or her performance at the 75th percentile for performance of one's peers. Now, let's just look at statistics for a second. Right? Average, in this case, means mean, okay? The arithmetic mean. So the average employee should probably fall at what percentile of the workforce? 100th percentile at the very top? 75th, 50%? Yeah, 50th percentile, right? What this is suggesting is that the average employee, or on the average, people conducting performance self-evaluations will elevate their evaluation of self as compared to their peers, and will do it in a very significant way. That is to say, they will elevate themselves halfway up the ladder to the very top performers that are above them in terms of actual performance indicators. So self-evaluations can be good platforms for dialogue relating to employee development, but they're not particularly good platforms for starting a dialogue about current performance assessments, particularly as used as a basis for critical personnel actions. Immediate supervisor can conduct performance evaluations. Very, very common. It's the kind of thing that I happen to be doing right now that I was alluding to. Now here I want to call your attention though to the difference between the de jure and the de facto supervisor of a worker. Now do you know what I mean by de jure and de facto?
The de jure is the one that works with the person every day. The de facto is someone who isn't in direct contact with that employee.
Close. Let's go this route. This is what I'm intending by these. The de facto supervisor is the person who, in the informal, particularly in the informal organization, provides the immediate supervision of an individual. The de jure supervisor may be somebody else who, in the formal organization, in the formal hierarchy of the organization, is titularly regarded as the supervisor. I'll give you an example of that, and I'll make it very personal. I am the de jure supervisor for a number of people in the organization, but I really don't supervise them in their day-to-day activities. There's somebody else who's their immediate task supervisor, sees them every day, deals with their day in and day out issues, and it is a much better situation to tell the employee and to tell me about how the employee is doing, what they're doing well, where they need some help, etc. But the organization, the formal organization doesn't recognize these other individuals as reporting officials. And having to find a reporting official someplace in the hierarchy settles on whoever happens to be a department chair or something like this. So there can be a real problem when you have an immediate supervisor who is a de jure supervisor providing what is supposed to be highly valuable, highly credible, objective, but informed assessment of a person's work performance when the de jure supervisor may have very little direct contact with that individual. What's a solution to that that you might consider as you're trying to improve the quality of an evaluation if you're the de jure supervisor?
Input from the task supervisor?
Yeah, input from the de facto supervisor. Very, very much so. What else? Is that the only other option you have? You got that option. You got that option. You got other options. That's the key. Bottom line, exercise some options, right? These are really important things, typically, really important things. And so use in as transparent a way as you can, but also in as fair and equitable way as you can the other sources of information you have, so that if you find yourself in that kind of situation where you're a de jure supervisor, but you're still at some distance from the people, that you're at least working with information that you can regard as accurate and reliable. Right? What are some of the, who are some of the other people who can do this? Well, immediate subordinates, which is an interesting idea. I've been invited, for example, to participate and to provide input into an evaluation of the dean. I've been asked to provide information and input into an assessment of Dr. Bach, our provost's performance as a provost. And for the record and for the camera, the dean, the provost, top notch. I actually do believe that as well. All right. Then there's this thing called a 360-degree evaluation. And the 360-degree evaluation is an effort to get feedback from all people who naturally come in contact with an employee in the conduct of his or her performance. So you'd be including clients in terms of a social work context, and you'd be working back from the client's experience with the worker in terms of people from other organizations, people within your own organization who might be part of a team, who are working with the individual with regard to the tasks that they perform and the job they're expected to perform. The whole idea of a 360-degree evaluation is comprehensive, sensitive, multi-dimensional information to assess performance from a wide variety of perspectives. How do you perform program evaluations? Well, there are a variety of ways of doing that. You've got the form in front of you, so keep that in front of you. I want to show you something right now to give you something to consider here. This has so many pages, I didn't want to kill that many trees. Let me give you an idea. This is the current performance instrument that we use within the department. We piloted it this year, and then we were actually told that there would be some different parameters, some different requirements for next year. So this is a one-time only kind of thing. The thing that we'll be using next year will be some variation on this. Notice that so much of this is going to be qualitative in nature. And also notice the title of this. This is both a performance appraisal instrument, and it's also a workload planning instrument. So in one and the same instrument, depending upon the timing of its application, it's designed to engage a negotiation and a dialogue between the chair and faculty members with regard to their assignments and their activities for the next year. And then, having done that, that particular document becomes the baseline for the performance appraisal for the following year. At least that's the logic here. Right? Notice certain key information, workload distribution. Typically, for example, most faculty member here will have 3 units of teaching, 3 teaching assignments that are required of them, a research emphasis and a service emphasis. Everybody required to have 5 such emphases. But it's possible that somebody could have 2 here, 1 here, or any kind of variation that can be successfully negotiated. Teaching. Now look here. Faculty members assessment. Place for the faculty member to provide a narrative, an evaluation of their own performance with regard to teaching this particular semester. Then the evaluator's assessment of that. Going on the record, becoming accountable as an evaluator, as a supervisor for the judgments that are being made there. Continuing through teaching, advising as part of teaching, contribution to curricular development. Look at all this narrative here. Then we get into research. Oh, by the way here. Then overall assessment of teaching. Faculty member, evaluator. Research, same kind of stuff. Service, look at all that writing. Tell you this, it did provide for high quality exchanges with the faculty members about this. Now, I want to show you something. This is the instrument that we're required to use here at the university. One variation of this or another for staff people. This is the instrument that's actually being used. As a matter of fact, I deleted all the necessary information here to keep this confidential. This is one that actually came off of one of the things that I'd submitted earlier in the week. Now, okay, so you do a bunch of writing there, but it's not even essay, it's just identifier stuff. Now, there's a slightly different form than is actually depicted here, but this summarizes it. Notice here, standard evaluation competencies for staff people. Here's the job knowledge that's required. Consider the employee's knowledge and application of techniques, skills, procedures, expertise, etc. required to perform the job. Okay, here's the first one. Possesses the technical knowledge and displays understanding of all aspects of the job. And as a supervisor, you're given 5 different options that are there, and you simply fill in the blank on one of these, and it goes from needs attention to outstanding. These are all computer-based at this point in time, so you just, click with the mouse on the appropriate circle. What's the significance factor? 5 different options that are provided for you. Does not apply to a high level of significance. Now, it's going to be the same response categories for every one of almost all of the following items. So, for example, still in job knowledge, demonstrates ability to make sound, feasible decisions in a timely, independent manner. Look at your significance factor. That's it. No narrative. No narrative. It's contained right there. This is a graphic scale that's being used here, an entirely different logic for the evaluation. Develops policies and procedures in an appropriate manner. Well, maybe that's not important. Okay, so you might say here that it's adequate, but it does not apply. No problem. Continue. Accomplishment of objectives, an array of questions there. Quality of work, array of questions there. Initiative and creativity, an array of questions there. And again, you can have as a significance factor on any of these things, simply very, very low, or something that's very, very high. Page after page of these kind of things. Supervisory skills, maybe it doesn't apply, maybe it does. Dependability. Professional contributions. Is the person a building coordinator? Then, current professional development, future professional development, overall, yeah. There was a different narrative there. This is just an example of what you probably shouldn't put in one of these kind of things, right? Here at this university, once that's completed, once you've had a conversation with the individual, this is then sent electronically to the individual who has the opportunity to respond to it in writing as part of the computer system. That's then bounced back to the supervisor, giving the opportunity for the supervisor to make additional comments, and then it moves forward. Now notice here, evaluation generated by somebody in HR, filled out initially by a supervisor, right? Then submitted to the employee for feedback, submitted back to the supervisor, and then submitted to a reviewing official. All the work I do in these kind of things goes to the dean. And then eventually signatures on the paper record, goes back to HR. Okay? Look how different those things look. Right? One canned, one in effect kind of more labor intensive, more creative. I would argue more sensitive. Some would argue perhaps more open to bias. Which do you prefer? If you wanted your performance in your agency to be evaluated tomorrow, would you prefer the more open-ended, more narrative approach, or would you prefer something like this? Narrative, narrative, narrative. If you were the supervisor conducting an evaluation, which would you prefer to fill out? This one? Kind of suggests interesting too, isn't it, that for at least some of you, if you're the supervisor, you'd rather have one form that you're conducting, but if you're the person who's being evaluated, you'd rather have the other form that's being that's being used. You know, world isn't perfect. Okay, whoops, let me go back to something here. Your author, Weinbach and Taylor, really make a very strong statement that evaluation should not involve comparisons with other persons. And I think what they're writing out of is a social work value set rather than, at this point in time, the variety of options that are available and that we see frequently in other kind of contexts. The evaluations, performance evaluations anchored against other people's performances is quite common in the business community, and it's quite common in a variety of other kind of contexts. Right. Then there are the variations of that. For example, the military, at least when I was on active duty, would use a system where a variety of different dimensions had to be anchored with closed choice options like that second questionnaire or the assessment instrument that I showed, but would also have to have narrative defending each of those classifications or evaluations. But then in addition to that, which all seems now anchored against absolutes, there were norms that were established so that reviewing officers could only place a certain percentage of one's complement of officers in the highest 20% or 5% or whatever. In other words, in the end, you still had to make evaluations as to what a kind of ordinal ranking or what percentile one would place the officer being evaluated. And you were confined, let's say if you had 10 individuals that you supervised, you would be permitted to place one and only one in the top tier. You'd be permitted to place two, but only two in the next tier. You'd be required to place no more than 3 in the third tier, etc., until you had the total number of tiers exhausted that were available for you for the number of people that you had to evaluate. One of my very, very good friends told me fairly early in his career and told me on a telephone interview, we'd gone through college together, I knew him very, very well. And he's a pilot. And he was outraged and just terribly frustrated and disappointed. He didn't particularly care for his commander, but my friend was a very, very good pilot, had very, very good what are called OERs, officer effectiveness reports, but then had been rated in the middle tier. Now, it's possible that that was justified. It's possible that if you're a very good pilot among other very, very good pilots, and if your commander is told you can only put one person in the top tier, you can only put 2 in the second tier, and you have to put 3 in the third tier, that you might find yourself just as a function of probability in the third tier, even though there would be no objective measure that could be identified that would justify why you and why not somebody else. It was a function of the evaluation system itself. Right? But he knew at that moment that he could not make a career of the Air Force because an Air Force officer couldn't be in the middle tier at any point in his first 4 years and be promotable. And so he left the service. That's some of the significance that we have about these kind of things. Okay. Team or group focused evaluations. We're really picking up steam now, folks. Get ready for this. Tie the team's results to organizational goals as best you can. You've got all this stuff, don't you? I don't need to read it to you, do you? Okay, cool. All right. It was in your chapter. Okay, right. What are some of the types of bias here? Positive leniency, where, you know, oh, hey. By the way, beware of this one because it's so easy to do. This is the one you're likely to do so that you don't get your supervisees angry at you. So you can make it as easy a process for you as possible. And it sets up all kinds of problems later on when you create this kind of very positive image, very positive formal feedback of performance. And the individual may be far below that in terms of actual behavior, actual performance. And you've cut the rug out from yourself for many of the actions that may be necessary in the future, and you've communicated basically a lie to the individual in terms of what you expect and what you and how you value the person's performance. In the long run, there are no positives to this particular one. All right? Negative leniency, halo effect, blah, blah, blah. You can read it as well. All right? Things to emphasize. Now we'll emphasize getting out of here. Okay, see you.